Love and Friendship by Jane Austen. Deceived in friendship and betrayed in love. Letter the first from Isabel to Laura. How often, in answer to my repeated entreaties that you would give my daughter a regular detail of the misfortunes and adventures of your life, have you said no, my friend? Never will I comply with your request till I may be no longer in danger of again experiencing such dreadful ones. Surely the time is now at hand. You are this day 55. If a woman may ever be said to be a safety from the determined preservance of disagreeable lovers and the cruel perceptions of upstate, father, surely it must be at such a time of life. Isabel. Letter second, Laura to Isabel. Although I cannot agree with you in supposing that I shall never again be exposed to misfortunes as unmerited as those I have already experienced, yet to avoid the impulsion of accidents or ill nature, I will gratify the curiosity of your daughter, and may the fortitude with which I have suffered the many afflictions of my past life provide to her a useful lesson of the support of those which may be for her in her own. Laura. Third letter. Laura to Marianne. As the daughter of my most intimate friend, I think you entitled to that knowledge of my unhappy story which your mother has so often solicited me to give you. My father was a native of Ireland and inhabitant of Wales. My mother was the natural daughter of a Scots heir by an Italian opera girl. I was born in Spain and received my education at a convent in France. When I had reached my 18th year, I was recalled by my parents to my paternal roof in Wales. Our mansion was situated in one of the most romantic parts of the Vale of Uske. My charms are now considerable, softened and somewhat impaired by the misfortunes I have undergone. I was once beautiful, but lovely as I was the grace of my person, with the least of my perfections. Of every accomplishment, customary to my sex, I was mistress. When in the convent, my progress had always exceeded my instructions. My equipments had been wonderful for my age. And I had shortly surpassed my master. In my mind, ever virtue that would adorn it was centered, it was the rendezvous of every good quality and of every noble sentiment. A sensibility trembling alive to every affliction of my friends, my acquaintances, and practically to every affliction of my own was my only fault, if a fault it could be called. Alas, how alert now, though indeed my own misfortunes do not make less impression on me than they ever did, yet now I never feel for those of another. My accomplishment to being to fate, I can neither sing as well nor dance so gracefully as I once did, and I have entirely forgot the minute de la cour, adieu. Laura. Letter 4th, Laura to Marianne. Our neighborhood was small, for the consist of only your mother. She may probably have already told you that being left by her parents in the indigent circumstances. She had retired into villa of an uneconomical motives. There it was, our friendship was commendance. Isabel was then 1 and 20. Though pleasing both in her person and manners, she never possessed the 100th part of my beauty or accomplishment. Isabel had seen the world. She had passed 2 years at one of the first boarding schools in London, had spent a fortnight in Bath, and had spent one night in Southampton. Be aware, my Laura, be aware of inspired vanities and idle dissipations of the metropoles of England. Be aware of the unmeaning luxuries of Bath and the stinking fish of Southampton. Alas, how am I to avoid those evils I shall never be exposed to, but probability if they are of my ever testing the disappellation of London? The luxuries of Bath or the stinking fish of Southampton, I who am doomed to waste my day of youth and beauty in an humble cottage in the Vale of Oscar. Little did I then think I was ordered as soon to quit that humble cottage for the decideful pleasure of the world. Adieu, Laura. Letter 5th, Laura to Marianne. One evening in December, as my father, my mother, and myself were engaged in social conversations around our fireside, we were on a sudden greatly astonished by hearing a violent knocking on the outward door of our rustic court. Our father started. "What noise is that?" said he. "It sounds like a louder rapping at the door," replied my mother. "It doesn't indeed," cried I. "I am of your opinion," said my father. "It certainly does appear to process from some uncommon violence exerted against our unpretending door." "Yes," exclaimed I cannot help thinking it must be somebody who knocks off admittance." "That is another point," replied he. "We must not depend it to determine on what motives the person may knock, though that someone does rap at the door. I am partly convinced." "Here a second, from Ben's rap," interrupted my father in his speech, and somewhat alarmed my mother and me. "Had we better not go and see who is it?" said she. "The servants are out. I think we had," replied I. "Certainly," added my father, "by all means." "Shall we go now?" "Shall, my father? The sooner the better," answered he. "Oh, let no time be lost," cried I. A third more violent rave than ever again assolated our ears. "I am certain there is somebody knocking at the door," said my mother. "I think there must," replied my father. "I fancy the servants are returned," said I. "I think I hear Mary going to the door." "I am glad of it," cried my father, "for I long to know who it is." I was right in my conjectures, for Mary, instantly entering the room, informed us that a young gentleman and his servant were at the door, who had lost their way. They were very cold and begging leave to warm themselves by our fire. "Won't You admire them? Said I. You have no objection, my dear, said my father. None in the world, replied my mother. Mary, without waiting for any further commands, immediately left the room and quickly returned, introducing the most beauteous and amiable youth I had ever beheld. The servant she kept to herself. My natural sensibility had already been greatly affected by the sufferings of unfortunate strangers, and no sooner did I first behold him, then I feel that on him the happiness or mercy of my future life must depend. Adieu, Laura. Letter 6. Laura to Marianne. The noble youth informed us that his name was Lindis. For practically reasonable, however, I shall conceal it under that of Talbot. He told us that he was the son of an English baronet, that his mother had been for many years no more, and that he had a sister of the middle size. My father, he continued, is a mean and merciless wretch. It is only to such practical friends as this dear party that I would thus betray his phalanx. Your virtues, my amiable poultry, addressing himself to my father, your dear Colidia, and my charming Laura, call on me to respond in you my confidence. We both, my father, seduced by the false glares of fortune and the deluding pomp of title, insisted on my giving my hand to Laura, giving my hand to Lady Dorothea. No, never, exclaimed I. Lady Dorothea is lovely and engaging. I prefer no woman to her, but no, sir, that I scorn to marry her in compliance with your wishes. No, never shall be said that I applied to my father. We all admired the noble manliness of his reply. He continued. Sir Edward was surprised. He had Rahib's title expected to meet with so spirited an opposition to his will. Sir Edward, where Edward in the name of wonder, said he, did you pick up this meaning gibberish? You have been studying novels, I expect. I scorned to answer. It would have been beneath my dignity. I mounted my horse and followed by my faithful William set forth for my aunts. My father's house is situated in Bedfordshire. My aunt is in Middlesex, and though I flattered myself with being a tolerable proficient in geography, I know not how it happened. But I found myself entering this beautiful vale, which I found is in South Valley. When I had expected to have reached my aunt's. After having wandered some time on the banks of the Ouse without knowing which way to go, I began to lament my cruel destiny in the bitterest and most pathetic manner. It was now perfectly dark, not a single star was there to direct my step, and I know not what might have befallen me had I not at length discerned though the Solomon gloom that surrounded me a distant light, which as I approached it, I discovered to be the cheerful blaze of your fire, impelled by the combination of misfortunes under which I labored, namely fear, cold, and hunger. I hesitated not to ask admittance, which at length I have gained, and now my adorable Laura continued to be talking my hand. When may I hope to receive that reward of all the painful sufferings I have undergone during the course of my attachment to you, to which I have ever aspired? Oh, when will you reward me with yourself this instant, dear and amiable Edward? Replied I. We were immediately united by my father, who he had never taken orders, had been bred to the virtues. Laura. Letter 7th. Laura to Marianne. We remained but a few days after our marriage in the Vale of Osque. After taking an affecting farewell of my father, my mother, and my Isabella, I accompanied Edward to his aunties in Middlesex. Philippa received us both with very expansion of affectionate love. My arrival was indeed a most agreeable surprise to her, as she had not only been totally ignorant of my marriage with her nephew, but he had never ever had the slightest idea of there being such a person in the world. Augusta, the sister of Edward, was and visit to her when we arrived. I found her exactly what her brother had described her to be, of the middle size. She received me with equal surprise, though not with equal cordiality as Philippa. There was a disagreeable coldness and forbidding receivers in her reception of me, which was equally distressed and unexpected. None of that interesting sensibility or amiable sympathy in her manners and addresses to me when we first met, which should have distinction our introduction to each other. Our language was neither warm nor affectionate. Our expressions of regard were neither animated nor cordial. Her arms were not open to receive me to her heart, though my own were extended to press her to mine. A short conversation between Augusta and her brother, which I accidentally overhead enraged my dislike to her, and convinced me that her heart was no more formed for the soft tie of love than for the endearing intercourses of friendship. But do you think that my father will ever be reconciled to this impudent connection? Said Augusta. Augusta replied to the noble youth, I thought you had a better opinion of me than of Imagine. I would so abjectly regard myself as to consider my father's concurrence in any of my affairs, neither of consequences or concern to me. Tell me, Augusta, with sincerity. Did you ever know me consult his inclinations or follow his advice in the least trifling practical since the age of 15? Edward, replied she, you are surely too different in your own praise, since you were 15 only. My dear brother, since you were 5 years old, I entirely equipped you to ever having willingly contributed to the satisfaction of your father. But still, I am not without apprehensions of your being shortly obliged to degrade yourself in your own eyes by seeking a support of your wife in the generosity of Sir Edward. Never, never, Augusta, will I so demean myself, said Edward. Support? What support will Laura want which she can receive from him? Only those very insignificant ones of victuals and drink, answered she. Victuals and drink, replied my husband, in a most nobly contemptuous manner, endorsed though. Then imagine that there is no other support of any exalted mind such as I am Laura's than the mean and indelicate employment of eating and drinking. None that I know of so efficacious, returned Augusta. And did you then never feel the playing pangs of love? Augusta replied by Edward. Does it appear impossible to your will and corrupted palates to exist on love? Can you not conceive the luxury of living in every distress that poverty can inflict with the object of your tenderest affections? You are too ridiculous, said Augusta, to argue with. Perhaps, however, you may in time be convinced that. Here I was prevented from hearing the remainder of her speech by the appearance of a very handsome young woman who was unheard into the room at the door of which I had been listening. On hearing her announced by the name of Lady Dorotha, I insistently quitted my post and followed her into the parlor, for I well remembered that she was a lady posed as a wife for my Edward by the cruel and unrelenting Bonnet. Although Lady Dorotha's visit was nominally to Philippa and Augusta, yet I have some reason to imagine that acquainted with the marriage and reveals of Edward to see me was a principal motive to it. I soon perceived that though lovely and elegant in her person and though easy and polite in her address, she was of that inferior order of being with regard of delicate feeling, tender sentiments and refined sensibility of which Augusta was one. She stayed but half an hour and neither in the course of her visit confided to me any of her secret thoughts, nor requested me to confide in her any of mine. You will easily imagine, therefore, my dear Mariana, that I could not feel any ardent affection or very sincere attachment for Lady Dora. Letter 8. Laura to Marianne in continuation. Lady Dorothea had not left us long before another visitor as unexpected a one as her ladyship was announced. It was Sir Edward who, informed by Augusta of her brother's marriage, come doubtless to approach him for having dared to entitle himself to me without his knowledge. But Edward, foreseeing his design, approached him with heroic fortitude as soon as he entered the room and addresses him in the following manner. Sir Edward, I know the motive of your journey here. You come with the base design of reproaching me for having entered into an indissoluble engagement with Melora without your consent. But sir, I glory in the act. It is my greatest boast that I have incurred the displeasure of my father. So saying, he took my hand, and which Sir Edward, Philippa, and Augusta were doubtless reflecting with admiration on his undaunted bravery, led me from the parlor to his father's carriage, which yet remained at the door, and in which we were instantly conveyed from the pursuit of Sir Edward. The postilions had at first received order only to take the London roads as soon as we had sufficient reflected. However, we ordered them to drive to the seat of Edward's most practical friend, which was but a few miles distant. At mean, we arrived in a few hours, and in sending in our names were immediately admitted to Sophia, the wife of Edward's friend. After having been deprived during the course of 3 weeks of her real friend, for such I term your mother, imagine my transports at beholding one most truly worth of the name. Sophia was rather above the middle-sized, most elegant form, a soft languor spread over her lovely features, but increased their beauty. It was the characteristics of her mind. She was all sensibility and feeling. We flew into each other's arms, and after having exchanged vows of mutual friendship for the rest of our lives, instantly unfolded to each other the most inward secrets of our hearts. We were interrupted in the delightful employment by the entrance of Augusta, Edward's friend, who was just returned from a solitary ramble. Never did I see such an affecting scene as was the meeting of Edward and Augustus. My life, my soul, remained the former. My adorable age replied the latter, as they flew into each other's arms. It was too pathetic for the feeling of Sophia and myself. We fainted alternatively on a sofa. Laura. Letter the 9th, from the same to the same. Toward the close of the day, we received the following letter from Philippa. Sir Edward is greatly interested by your abrupt departure. He has taken back Augusta to Bedfordshire. Much as I wish to enjoy again your charming society, I cannot determine to determine society that I am not of such dear and deserving friends. When you visit to them is determined, I trust you will return to the arms of your Philippa. We returned a suitable answer to this affectionate note, and after thanking her for her kind invitation. Invitation assured her that we would certainly avail ourselves of it whenever we might have no other place to go to. Though certainly nothing could be any reasonable being have appeared more satisfactory than so grateful a reply to her invitation. Yet I know not how it was, but she was certainly capricious enough to be displeased with our behavior, and in a few weeks after, either to revenge our conduct or revive her own solitude, married a young and illiterate 1400. This impert step, though we were sensible that it would probably deprive us of that fortune which Philippa had never thought us to expect, could not on our own accounts excited from our exalt minds a single son, yet fearful lest it might prove a source of endless mercy to the deluded bride. Our trembling sensibility was gratefully affected when we were first informed of the event. The affectionate entreaties of Augusta and Philippa had we could forever consider house their house as our home, easily prevailed on us to determine never more to leave them in the society of my Edward and this amiable pair. I passed the happiest moments of my life. Our time was most delightful, spent in mutual protestations of friendship and involved of unalterable love, in which we were secure from being interrupted by interesting and disagreeable visitors. As Augustus and Sophia had on their first entrance in the neighborhood taken due care to inform the surrounding families that as their happiness centered wholly in themselves, they wished from no other society. But us, my dear Marina, such happiness as I then enjoyed was too perfect to the lasting. A more severe and unexpected blow at the once destroyed very sensation of pleasure. Convinced as you must be from what I have already told you concerning Augustus and Sophia, that there never were a happier couple, I need not, I imagine, inform you that their union had been contrary to the inclinations of their cruel and merciless parents, who had vainly endeavored with obstinate parents to force them into a marriage with those whom they had ever abhorred, but with a heroic fortitude worth to be related and admired, they had both consistently refused to submit to such despotic power, but which, after having so nobly disentangled themselves from the shackles of parental authority by a clandestine marriage, they were determined never to forfeit the good opinion they had gained in the world, in so doing by accepting any proposals of reconciliation that might be often them by their fathers to this farther trial of their noble independence, however they never ever exposed. They had been married but a few months whenever visit to the commandants, during which time they had been amply supported by a considerable sum of money, which Augustus had gracefully purloined from his unworthy father's secretary a few days before his union with Sophia. By our arrival, their expenses were considerably increased, though their means for supplying them were then nearly exhausted. But they exhilarated creatures scorned to reflect a moment on their pecuniary distress, and would have blushed at the idea of paying their debts. Alas, what was their reward for such interesting behavior? The beautiful Augustus was arrested, and we were all undone. Such perpetuous tragedy in the miraculous perpetrators of the deed will shock your gentle nature, dearest Marina, as much as it then affected at the decayed sensibility of Edward. Sophia Eulora of Augustus himself to compelled such unparalleled barbarity, where we were informed that an execution in the house would shortly take place. Ah, what could we do? But what we did, we sat and fainted on the sofa. Laura. Later than Laura in continuation. When we were somewhat recovered from the overpowering affections of our grief, Edward desired that we would consider what was the most prudent step to be taken in our unhappy situation, while he repaired to his imprisoned friend to lament over his misfortunes. We promised that we would, and he set forward on his journey to town. During his absence, we faithfully complied with his desire, and after the most mature deliberation, at length agreed that the best thing we could do was to leave the house, of which we very moment expected the officers of justice to take possessions. We waited, therefore, with the greatest impatience for the return of Edward in order to impart to him the result of our deliberation, but no Edward appeared. In vain did we count the tedious moment of his absence. In vain did we weep. In vain even did we say, "No, Edward returned." This was too cruel to unexpected a blow to our gentle sensibility. We could not support it. We could only faint. At length, collecting all the resolution, I was mistress of Irosis, and after packing up some necessary apparel for Sophia's and myself, I dragged her to a carriage I had ordered, and we instantly set out for London. As the habitations of Augustus was within 12 miles of town, it was not long. We arrived there, and no sooner had we entered Holborn than letting down one of the foreknown glasses, I inquired of every decent-looking person that we passed if they had seen my Edward. But as we drove too rapidly to allow them to answer my repeated inquiries, I gained little or indeed no information concerning him. Where am I to drive? Said the postulation. To Newbridge, gentle youth, replied I, to see Augustus. Oh, no, no, exclaimed Sophia. I cannot go to Newgate. I shall not be able to support the side of my Augustus is so cruel a confinement. My feelings are sufficiently shocked by the recital of his distress, but to behold it will overpower my sensibility, as I perfectly agree with her in the justice of her sentiments. The postulate was instantly directed to the return into the country. You may perhaps have been somewhat surprised, my dearest Marina, that in the distress I then endured, destitute of any support, and unprovided with any habilitation, I would never once have remembered my father and my mother, or my paternal cottage in the Vale of Bosque. To account of for this seeming forgetfulness, I must inform you of a trifling circumstances concerning them which I have as yet never mentioned. The death of my parents a few weeks after my departure is the circumstances I allude to. By their decreases I become the lawful inheritance of their house and furniture. But else, the house had never been their owner, and therefore due had only been an annuity on their own lives, such in the depravity of the world. To your mother I would have returned the player, should have been happy to have introduced to her my charming Sophia, and should with cheerfulness have passed the remainder of my life in their dear society in the Vale of Osque. Had not one obstacle to the exhaustion of so agreeable a scheme inverted, which was the marriage and removal of your mother to a distant part of Ireland, Laura.